Welcome to the Bitchuation Room podcast. I'm your host, Francesca Fiorentini. It is a Frantastic Friday. We got a great episode. Just a doozy. You know, sometimes Fridays are just sort of like a smattering of stories. And sometimes we dig in. Sometimes they are interviews. We last week had Mehdi Hassan on the show. Amazing time. I hope everyone checked that out. You can obviously watch it or listen as a podcast. Yeah, it was fun. And so we decided to follow up the fun with a long look at RFK Jr., our new incoming, likely head of Health and Human Services. We have the co-hosts of the Conspirituality podcast, Matthew Remski and Derek Beres, back on the show. Very excited to have them here. Going to dig into HHS head, the new NIH, National Institute of Health guy, whose name I'm not going to pronounce right, but he's scary. A little bit of Peter Thiel, possibly, and then maybe Tulsi. Tulsi's in a cult. Who knew? I mean, I should have known. I knew she was, effectively like an Assadist paid for by the Syrian government, and like is a Hindu nationalist in some ways and is a massive Islamophobe, but she's also part of a cult, and they are experts in such things. So maybe they've heard of it, and maybe I've just been on the outs. So tuck in for that. And in the meantime, I hope you are liking the stream, sharing the stream, giving us a thumbs up, clicking the little bell so you know whenever we're going live, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. I know you're saying Wednesdays. What do you mean? Yeah, Wednesdays, we have an entire hour that is called the bonus episode, and it is for our patrons of the show. Thank you to all of them and all of y'all who have just, become part of the Frantifa. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room is where you go. On Wednesday, we did a really deep dive into Social Security and Medicare and all of the ways that Donald Trump is absolutely gunning to cut those things, privatize those things, raise the age of retirement for, Social Security and Medicare benefits to kick in. That is absolutely on the chopping block for, the Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk's Doge, whatever the F, little kids table of government committees. But, quite a scary kids table, like a kids table where like everyone's Chucky, like that vibe. So we dug into that. I sounded off about a personal healthcare experience of mine. And what do you know? Now people are being arrested for being exasperated at their health insurance industries and, praising Mr. Mangione. So, the class war is on, people. It's on. It's on. We're losing, but it's on. And with that, let me bring in for the rest of the show. They are the co-hosts of the podcast Conspirituality that truly tracks the dark underbelly of the so-called alternative medicine world and how it converges with the likes of MAGA, Christian nationalism, and everything else. They're also the authors of the book Conspirituality that everyone should buy. Please welcome Matthew Remski and Derek Beres. Hi.
Hey, Fran.
Let me get my windows in order. Hi. So good to have you guys back. Yes, Derek and I were talking before we went live about a year ago that you were on talking about Project 2025. And
Yes.
looks like we're getting it.
Oh, yes, we are definitely getting it. And even bigger than I imagined because of the situation we're going to be talking about today, because so much of the emphasis is focused on various aspects of the politics of it, but we didn't cover the health aspects as much. And now we are truly entering a dystopia.
Now, is Project 2025, from your reading of it, that big into, we know, and it is a slippery slope. We know that it's like transgender is probably the word that's mentioned more than anything else, right? They're sort of really, hell bent and already have been successful in taking away, gender affirming care from trans people and children in this country. But like, I didn't think that, pushing raw milk was really, part of the new Christian nationalist agenda.
the author of the HHS chapter in Project 2025 is Roger Severino, who's a staunch Catholic and anti-abortion activist. So there's a lot of anti-trans talk, a lot of anti-abortion talk, and there's also a lot of talk about dismantling, as you just flagged in your intro, Medicare, Medicaid, and probably Social Security. But no, amazingly, raw milk is not in the document.
And there were 900 pages. They had the opportunity to cover it, didn't they?
Yeah, gee, Bobby. Rob, nobody calls him Rob except for me. Well, that's actually really interesting because, HHS does oversee, it's like split, right? It oversees the FDA in part, but it also oversees Medicare and Medicaid, which is massive, right? So the idea that, what scares me is that some of the, and we're going to talk about it more specifically, but some of the worst instincts of an RFK Jr. as head of the HHS, the guinea pigs for his project are basically most readily available. The guinea pigs are people who are Medicare recipients and Medicaid recipients. People who are on state government health care, which is terrifying.
I believe it's 11 agencies overall. It could be 17. I've seen both. I believe it's 11 agencies that the HHS oversees.
So it's quite a few. But I want to let's get into like our RFK today. The big news is that I don't legally understand what the hell this is, but RFK Jr. is asking his lawyer to ask the FDA to overturn the polio vaccine, filing a petition to do that, to overturn the polio. Now, I didn't think polio was going to be like the first vaccine. And it is very ironic, guys, because polio was the vaccine literally given away for free. And apparently we're supposed to be mad at like big pharma's, greed. It's like, bitch, polio was for free. Obviously then people went on to make tons and tons. Obviously pharmaceutical industries went to make tons of money at, but RFK Jr.'s lawyer, Mr. Siri, is also filing a petition that seeks to pause the distribution of 13 other vaccines. And in some cases, those were quashed. COVID vaccine mandates around the country, sued federal agencies for disclosure of records related to vaccine approvals, and subjected prominent vaccine scientists to grueling videotape depositions. So he's not even in office yet. He has not been approved. RFK Jr. has not been confirmed, and he's coming in hot. What do you understand of why this is happening?
My reading of the article, because if you read across different media organizations, it's in the past tense. So my understanding is Siri has previously filed to end the polio vaccine. I think that they're covering it from the angle of this is someone who's consulting with Bobby for the next administration about who to pick for staff. He has also made his career, like Kennedy has, with vaccine lawsuits. So I'm not sure that the polio vaccine, ending it right now, is new because he's not in position yet. The framework is that he's done this before.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, zooming out on Bobby, we've done so many episodes on him. I think it's about a dozen. And this discrepancy over is polio actually going to be the first thing that he tackles or not? Or, is there some timeline issue that we're not really seeing? Everything is kind of obscure with him. And it's not only because, he's incredibly disorganized as a communicator, very difficult for him to delegate things. The campaign was a total mess. But also, there's just nothing that comes out of Bobby's mouth that isn't bullshit. And it's a particular flavor of bullshit that hooks into plausible suspicions and grievances, about the modern world, and bureaucracy and its hypocrisies and people's feeling of alienation from it. Mm-hmm. The majority of the time, his ideas are these romantic nature fallacy, kind of strange, drivelly spiritual ideas that mourn over a golden age that never was, which is really, really ironic when we're talking about polio. But he also ends up casting this effective spell of spiritual warriorship and divine intuition over followers who are disenchanted with all of the institutions, and they think they can, he can give everybody the life of a gentleman farmer, So
I just think it's also particularly egregious that some of the things that the vaccines that he's specifically going after, it's not like he's like going after the HPV vaccine, which is a breakthrough and great and all this, but it's specifically vaccines that have saved children's lives over decades, generations, and like that is truly who is in the crosshairs and who is most at risk under a Bob Kennedy HHS department.
Yeah, and I don't think that everything Kennedy says is bullshit, but he obscures things and he makes himself sound plausible. So for example, he says he wants to end pharma lobbying. I would love that, but it's the biggest lobby in DC, and since 1990 Republicans have benefited more than Democrats, so they're not going to end that. He says he wants to end direct to consumer advertising. We are one of 2 countries in the world that allow pharma to advertise directly to consumers. I would love that, but go back to my pharma lobby comment. They're never going to go for that. And he says we have a chronic disease epidemic. That is true. The problem is that his solutions don't match what would actually help it. Things such as universal health care.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about that, but yes, Matthew.
Well, I think the big question is just how effective is he going to be? And I am personally preparing for the worst just because of his ardency. Like, this is a guy who believes who he is guided, and he says this openly, by his mystical communion with God. And he seems to have the goal, always a huge goal, repairing the entire American psyche and soul, which I think for him and for his followers, the rupture really goes right back to that being blown apart on the grassy knoll and at the Ambassador Hotel. And he is unstoppable in his drivenness. This is what everybody around him says. There's no contradiction in what he says. There's no honoring his family legacy. There's no act of like throwing his more progressive followers under the bus or reckoning with accusations of sexual assault that are going to stop him.
Sure. Well, those definitely wouldn't stop anyone in the Trump administration.
Right. And specifically for him, he is so hell-bent on this notion of purification of, America's body and soul. And to me, it's got to be rooted in this, very shameful side quest he took into 14 years of addiction. And he seems to associate all chemical interventions, into pain and suffering, to stop pain and suffering, as kind of debased distractions from true healing. And his followers really, really buy into that.
Sure. Especially as you guys have talked about, and we've talked about when you've been on the show, he's preying on a very real disgust with the pharmaceutical industry, that, yes, it markets directly to us and costs exorbitant amounts of money, and no one seems to be reining that in. And it's like, okay, so there's lack of trust in big pharma, and he's capitalizing on that to say, yes, any kind of intervention is awful. And, I see stories about, hospitals ratting out the pregnant patients that administered fentanyl to for having drugs in their system. And you're like, this is the perfect storm that creates people who are like, well, you shouldn't birth in a hospital in the first place. Right. Go into the woods, like the natural birthing psychos that you've talked about, I know, on your show. But to Derek's point, and I love the way you guys get into both of this, because one of you is like, it's like, okay, it's weirder than that. But I like Derek, talking about, okay, let's get rid of the pharma lobbying. Let's talk about, for example, cornstarch that is in everything, or corn syrup that's in everything, right? High fructose corn syrup, something that, Mayor Michael Bloomberg in his time tried to get rid of, and the right freaked out about it. Now the right, I guess, doesn't have a problem with that. But here's Bernie Sanders sort of speaking on this, like, can we work with RFK Jr.? And I wanted to get your guys' reactions.
Food industry concerned about their profits, could care less about the health of the American people. I think they have to be taken on. I think, on the other hand, when you talk about,
hang on, let me back.
I think you have a food industry concerned about their profits, could care less about the health of the American people. I think they have to be taken on. I think, on the other hand, when Mr. Kennedy talks about taking fluoride out of our water system. I think what the scientific community will tell you, that would be a disaster in terms of dental health in this country. His views on vaccine are in very wrong in so many ways. We will see how the process unfolds. So I think what he's saying about the food industry makes sense to me. A lot of other things that he's saying are extremely dangerous.
No, he actually said early on, he said, I think it's exactly correct. Take a look.
From what I've not talked to Mr. Kennedy in a number of years, actually. I think what he is saying about the food industry is exactly correct.
So that was the line that got taken by news outlets, and lifted up. What he's saying is exactly correct. Now, he then caveated it, obviously, with, I don't agree with him on vaccines and other things. That's very dangerous and worrisome, but the die was cast. What do you like? What is your reaction to Bernie saying, okay, but he's exactly correct on the food industry?
I think that's Bernie leaving a sound clip hanging, which actually means he's exactly right about predatory capitalism. Like, that's his vein. He's saying, he's probably referring to price gouging and, poor, labor practices and things that really are within his lane of the 1%, because inequality is his expertise. And then, of course, he has to go back and backtrack, right? He has to clean that up.
Sure. Well, I mean, I do also think like food chemicals, right? And pesticides, it's like, just because people want, I mean, it's prohibitively expensive, but if you want to buy organic, that is now seemingly like the lane and the realm of the RFK Jr. supporters. But you have to go against big agriculture. Trump's not going to go against big ag. So to me, and I'm curious, Derek, about your thoughts, but it's like, for me, it's like, oh, you just gave him kind of a win there. Like, I think he's correct. And yet he's so deeply and dangerously wrong on so many things. But what do you think?
Well, I think that Americans generally need a better education in chemistry, because that's a lot of the problem here. What RFK is exploiting is chemophobia, as well as the naturalistic fallacy. So the idea that what's natural is good and whatever's created in a lab is bad.
Sure.
And that comes directly from an ignorance of chemistry. So when you talk about high fructose corn syrup, you're talking about a 5% difference between fructose and sucrose. That's where the high comes in. But if you talk to anyone, any actual chemist, they'll tell you that in our body, that's not going to actually make any sort of comparable difference. So there's an argument to be made here for the corn industry pushing corn because of all the subsidies from the 1970s and why that might be a problem throughout products. Mm-hmm. But when you're actually talking about the health risks, they're negligible. The real question is, why are so many high sugar processed foods? Why is that all people can afford? And why do they exist in food deserts, whereas access to fresh food is not available? Yeah. So Kennedy is really good at finding all these downstream problems like glyphosate, like food additives, and like HFCS, which are not actual problems, and making them seem like the problems, instead of looking upstream at the fact that we don't actually have universal health care, and the fact of why does the United States, out of all countries, rank extremely high in terms of food safety, but extremely low in terms of food accessibility? And those are questions that the MAHA crowd never actually address.
MAHA. I can't believe we're actually saying MAHA. I mean, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I'm not a chemist. I don't understand, but I also know glyphosate is not good for the human body. Like I know the studies. I've seen the studies in this is Monsanto's Roundup Ready, right? Where they use that in soy crops throughout Argentina, for example, where I used to live. And what the spraying of the glyphosate did and the Roundup Ready did was like severely debilitate the population. There had meant cancer, birth defects, but there's no way that he's going to be able to get that out of our agricultural industry, that seems like it's not going to happen. Like, I don't think that we're going to give up like pesticides and herbicides like willingly.
No, no, absolutely not going to. I would ask for a chemist to be on, because I've heard much different data in terms of the actual problems of glyphosate. And it's also true that the United States sprays less than a lot of other countries. We just are a larger country. So by volume, it seems more, but per acre, it's actually less than a lot of other countries. And the cancer incidences are usually related to agricultural workers who are around the product all the time, which is a real problem as compared to the consumer level where the toxicity levels are lower. Now, to your broader question about them going against them, no, they're not. The entire MAGA project, and by extension, the MAHA project, is about deregulation that is going to favor corporations. So the idea that they're going to go after them in any meaningful way is ludicrous.
Totally. No, I appreciate you're right about it. Yes, it affects farm workers primarily. And I agree that it is part of, sort of the opaqueness of every industry and the big lobbying arms of every industry. And to Matthew's point about both of your points, it really is about capitalism. And it also is about a lack of access to food, healthy food, and a lack of access to healthcare, which I want to talk about in a little bit. Before we leave RFK Jr., I was looking into who his deputy secretary would be, which is a guy named Jim O'Neill. And he's apparently a longtime associate of Peter Thiel, of all people. They co-founded the Mithril Capital Management, a venture fund that invests in medical technology and other startup companies. I don't know if I'm as terrified of this pick, because it sounds like they'll probably just try and give themselves, no bid government contracts to do unnecessary things. But what do you know of like Thiel's, tentacles on all this?
Thiel is in everything. I mean, he is everywhere. And I mean, so in one sense, in terms of being a VC, he has his money spread out across, many, many companies. So you can't always pinpoint one and be like, that's evil, that's not. But as a human being, he is horrible. Everything he touches, he's a horrible presenter. He has very strange thoughts about reality, and what he did to Gawker and the Hulk Hogan, media scandal was just indicative of his own neuroses. So anyone who actually goes, and he gave us JD Vance, we shouldn't forget that. Anyone who goes into business with him, I would be highly questionable of. I don't know his role with RFK at this point, though.
Just because we're on Peter Thiel, I have to play this clip for everybody, and we can briefly talk about the fallout of the killing of the CEO of United Healthcare. You've all spoken about, because of a lack of universal healthcare, because people don't have reliable doctors, can't afford procedures, getting denied medical claims, it inevitably turns them to bunk science and so-called, bad alternative medicine. And also is, as I've been railing about, and I'm sure you guys have been, hyper focusing on your own individualistic actions of going to the gym and drinking the right things and getting your supplements and doing all of this stuff to be like this perfect specimen, because heaven forbid you have an unforeseen medical incident and you're not able to pay for it. So all you can do, even though cancer will come for the healthiest among us, does not matter. All you can do is just get your body right, man, and get the right supplements, man. And like, it preys again that this entire bogus industry preys on the fact that we do not have healthcare. And here's Peter Thiel's response to the shooting of Brian Thompson. And I gotta say, I've not seen this guy, just like we never really saw Elon Musk too much before a few years ago. And there's a reason for that, because he looks like he is like an alien is about to be birthed out of his chest, but also he just did a massive bump of cocaine, and he's on Piers Morgan, and he's being asked, I'm not slowing this down, he's being asked about the killing. And like, Piers is asking him like, well, what do you say to people who can't afford healthcare and feel this is maybe, although awful, their only option to get justice?
And to those who think this shooter is a hero because he did it because he said this healthcare executive was presiding over a healthcare system which kills thousands of Americans by denying them cover, what would you say to them?
Like, what is okay? I'm sorry, I have to pause it because that was like 15 seconds. I feel like what's going through his mind is like, I get it. Like, if I were a poor, I would understand, but maybe not. Anyway, I'll play it.
You gotta wonder.
I don't know what to say. I still think you should try to make an argument, and I think this is there may be things wrong with our healthcare system, but you have to make an argument, and you have to try to find a way to convince people and change it by that. And this is not going to work.
That billionaire, are you sure it's not going to work? I'm sorry, that's all I have to say. No, billionaire venture capitalist Peter Thiel, whose smarmy fingers are all throughout our political system. There he is, and I just like, I'm sorry guys, but what is this? What is happening to this man? There's too many blood boys lined up.
So 2 weeks ago, Julian and I did a brief Conspirituality brief on Thiel's 2.5-hour conversation with Barry Weiss.
Oof.
We both listened to the entire thing. So if you want to ruin your weekend, you can find it on the Free Press's YouTube page, and you can really dive in, because that is how he talks all of the time.
So he's as inarticulate as Elon Musk, even though he thinks he's some sort of untouchable elite who's like, I mean, these are people who think they should be running the country. You can't spit out a cogent response. And like, I'm sorry, but he truly is terrifying looking. I don't want to judge. I know people can't control the kinds of veins that are in their forehead, but the squiggly ones are the scariest. Can we all agree that the squiggly ones, the ones that go up and down?
I think it's so ironic that he actually ends, or wherever you paused it, he ends with, I think you have to make an argument and do it that way. And he seems incapable of making an argument.
Yes,
and I think that speaks to the nature of the sheltered nature of power. Like, what actually happens in this moment, except somebody puts a microphone in front of his face and says, okay, so you're up. What do you think about this? And he doesn't have to consider this most of the time.
No.
He doesn't have to think about, okay, well, what are the actual consequences of, this predatory society that I'm actually creating? What does it actually cause? How does it impact people? How does it make people feel? Like, he doesn't have to do that. I think it's a real sort of painful stretch for him to be able to even asked by another narcissist what to think about, like, other people. Right?
Yes.
It's funny that they're going at it together. And by the way, I can't believe how much you piss Piers Morgan off, Fran.
It's just my very existence.
Yeah. He can't get enough, though. He's going to keep having you back, right?
Oh, sure. I mean, I basically have rejected him for weeks now, and then finally said yes last week.
Yeah,
but
right.
But I did want to ask, because the wind up to talking about Peter Thiel was really about the healthcare system and how much it has fed into some of the anti-science movements that you guys have tracked. And that really came to a head under COVID. And I remember one of the things that was going around were TikToks of people saying, like, well, why would the government offer a free vaccine now when I have to pay for everything else?
Exactly.
And it was so poignant and so real, because she was like, oh, you're so close to socialized medicine, but you'll probably go down the QAnon anti-vax path.
Right.
Yeah. And we're also speaking on a day where the New York Times published an op-ed by Andrew Whitty, who is the CEO of United Health Group. And he's praising Brian Thompson as this farm boy done good. And he says, we know the healthcare system is broken, but we are going to fix it. And here's the thing about it. He doesn't offer any solutions. Now, we know that UHC, which is my insurer, we know that they've denied 32% of claims while the industry average is 20%. Now, here's the irony. The only reason we know those percentages is because of the ACA and because of the public marketplace. Because if you get your insurance through your employer, or if you get your insurance privately, UHC or any insurer does not have to release denial rates. It's only because of the guardrails in the ACA and the public marketplace that we know that. Now,
That they have to disclose it, but there's no
they have to disclose it.
Right. But I was talking about this the other day, and but like, what about not denying so many claims? There's no stipulation that you can only deny, 15% of claims or whatnot.
Yes, and we know that Trump wants to dismantle this, and the administration probably will finally do that. So that means we won't have any insights into denial rates after next year, most likely. The same day that Whitty published this op-ed, ProPublica did a deep investigative piece showing how UHC has been denying care for autistic kids repeatedly over the years. So this is what we're up against. And you're absolutely right. It is the biggest challenge because we've been called for years pharma shills, which is hilarious because our healthcare system is broken. And people can't wrap their heads around the fact that the pharmaceutical industry is horrible, and yet their products are not, and they're actually life-saving. And we have to grapple with that. And what people like Kennedy are able to do is they're able to slide into the gaps in between the understanding of those two things and then make themselves seem like champions.
I mean, I would say like nationalize big pharma, but now we see who is in charge, and you're like, maybe not,
Yeah,
But I did want to go to, speaking of COVID, the nominee to head the National Institute of Health, which is fundamental in terms of research, medical research, vaccine research, and whatnot, who is Jay Bhattacharya. Bhattacharya, and I'm going to just play a little video. I'm sure you guys have seen him, but he is someone who was spouting the herd immunity theory for COVID-19 and still stands by it.
It's interesting because the science on COVID, on the lockdowns, on the mitigation measures, on a whole host of topics, if the public was listening, they would hear this idea that there was this univocal, sort of univocal conclusion that you had to do lockdowns, you had to wear masks, you had to socially distance, you had to put plastic barriers up, you had to close schools, you had to do all of these things, that the vaccines would stop transmission of the disease, that therefore it was warranted to force people to lose their jobs over them. All of these ideas were sold as if there was a scientific consensus in favor of them. That was a lie. There was never a scientific consensus on almost any of the topics. And as you say on masks, in fact, the pre-existing narrative, the pre-existing idea among most scientists before the pandemic was quite the opposite direction. What happened was a relatively small group, a cartel almost, of very powerful scientific bureaucrats took over the whole apparatus of science, at least as far as the public eye was concerned, dominated the media, dominated the message to politicians. And as a result, we had a catastrophic response to COVID. And we're going to be paying the cost of that for a very long time.
It's amazing that it could have been worse, you guys. Like hearing that guy speak, like the catastrophic. How do you think it could have been worse? Like, what?
Well, absolutely. Bhattacharya is an economist. We should point that out first of all. So he is not a healthcare expert. He is an expert in the economics of healthcare.
He's a doctor. Is that because he's a PhD?
A PhD in economics. So and he's funded by conservative organizations. Walker Bragman over at Important Context has done a lot of work on Bhattacharya, and he is funded by right-wing dark money groups.
Terrible.
And it could have absolutely been worse. The only reason it wasn't worse is because, as someone like Lori Garrett flagged back in the 90s, public health protocols have been waiting for the next pandemic for decades. So they were implemented. But look who was in charge telling people to inject bleach in their bodies. Yep. So it did go off the rails quite a bit.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's so terrifying to me. And of course, if he's an economist, the entire thing was, and we were doing the business can't suffer, step over dead bodies so that we can, people can keep their bottom lines. And those dead bodies, by the way, are your workers. So kudos. And it was also like we're in this like class war discussion. At least, I mean, I think we all are. And COVID was such a class war. Like, I think we really need to make sure that it wasn't the doctors, it was the economists telling us that we couldn't shut down. I mean, what he just said there was nothing but lies in the service of making sure that the stock market kept going up. And guess what? It did. Stock market was doing great when millions of people were dying. But anyway, yay NIH.
Well, just to remind, because it wasn't mentioned, Bhattacharya is one of the 3 co-authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, which is the document that argued for businesses staying open, and it was funded by right-wing money groups.
And which said herd immunity, that once we all get sick, it'll be fine, we'll be immune.
You take moderate measures to protect elderly folks, but otherwise let it rip, let everybody catch COVID. There won't be any long-term consequences. Long COVID, not going to be a thing. Yeah, that sort of thing. It's kind of, I think, in the same way that RFK Jr. exploits the epistemological sort of soup that Derek is describing. Somebody like Bhattacharya exploits the fact that in a broken and neoliberal directed healthcare for-profit system, we had basically, that was, largely sort of state, administered individually, and big divisions between red and blue states. We had this patchwork system of mitigations that of course were contradictory, that of course didn't make sense, that of course made people think that public health officials were making shit up because their hands were tied with regard to actually trying to get everybody on board doing the same thing. So very, very difficult situation. And, pre-existing fragmentation of the health economy is the condition, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I just before we leave, I feel like we left RFK, but I kind of want to come back briefly because he's got those twins. Who are these twins? We talked about them briefly. You guys, or not the twins, the brother and sister. They're not twins.
Casey and Callie Means.
Casey and Callie Means. Callie was on, I believe, Bill Maher talking a bunch of gobbledygook about
Casey. Casey was on Bill Maher.
See, I don't even know.
Callie is the brother. Callie is the brother. Casey is, or is it Kaylee? Kaylee or Callie?
Kaylee is the brother. Cassie is the sister. They are. So Callie is a Harvard and Stanford trained business graduate who interned at the Heritage in 2004. He goes on and rails against big pharma and big healthcare and all the bad things. And then his company called TrueMed basically uses a loophole in our system to use FSA and HSA dollars to buy things like supplements and ice baths and red light therapy. So and if you go to TrueMed's site, it says this is True Healing. Nothing on the site is FDA regulated or approved. Casey was training as a head and neck specialist right here in Portland, Oregon at OHSU. She left in her 5th year of residency after training at Stanford to write books about hormone health, but she's not trained in endocrinology. And she also sells supplements. She's the co-founder of a company called Levels, which sells continuous glucose monitors, mostly for non-diabetics in the biohacking space. So these are just examples of really polished people who come from business backgrounds who are able to capture the affect of what you flagged earlier about all the problems of the healthcare system, turn around and then sell unregulated and untested products.
And yet Elizabeth Holmes is behind bars. Wow.
Well, that's the
like,
thing.
If only I had held on and turned okay, first of all, let's all agree. If Elizabeth Holmes had not been Face the Music, she would be in the Trump administration right now. Can we just? Thank you. Okay,
100.
And I think that's something essential that Derek is pulling out there, which is that for all of the purification fetish and all of the chemophobia, it's like, in one hand, it's like, do not take this vaccine, and then there's a trench coat that opens, right? And there's a whole sort of shelf of supplements inside saying take these instead, which of course haven't been through any testing, and that somebody made in their garage or whatever.
Absolutely. Victroid on Twitch says H1N1 is just around the corner, just in time for another Trump presidency. Yeah, I mean, I guess I want to ask you guys, like, what are you advising people to do? What are you advising maybe your listeners or just the general public or parents? Like, what do you guys have thoughts about how, and I know it is hard for y'all because you, I think, so brilliantly advocate the need for collectivity, and like policy reform versus individualistic response, right? That's the
Yes.
premise that got us into this. But I guess I'm just asking you, like, what have you been, I mean, other than rising up and, doing revolution, like, what are you guys thinking?
So my heuristic has always been watch what they say and then watch what they sell. And it's a very good sense of guidance. So if you're seeing someone charismatic on social media or in these MAHA circles saying that there are problems with healthcare, problems with big pharma, yes, absolutely. But they're not getting to the right ones. So if they're saying these things are evil, buy these things instead, if there's a sales pitch as the end, that is always a red flag.
Yeah.
If something sounds, and this comes from, I just interviewed Rohin Francis recently for a separate project I have, who's a cardiologist in the UK, and I asked him a similar question, and he said, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So when Mark Hyman, who's also consulting with RFK Jr., comes out in his latest newsletter and says, can cacao fight cancer? Yeah, sounds too good to be true. So guess what? It's not true. And that's a very important thing to consider.
Yeah. Can you just, go ahead. Go ahead, man.
No, go ahead. You go ahead, Fran.
I'm jumping all over the place, but can you just remind people about RFK Jr.'s work in American Samoa and what happened?
Yeah. Do you have the timeline, Derek? Accurate? It's, I mean, I've got the details, some of the details.
I don't have all the timeline. We wrote that chapter a year and a half ago.
So
but just give the broad level.
Yeah, the broad level sort of picture is that there was a disastrous medical accident involving 2 children dying, I believe, because of a poorly administered MMR vaccine, and I think it was because the actual the liquid or the saline solution was either contaminated or it was the wrong one. 2 children died. RFK Jr. sends a letter to the president of American Samoa and says, I think you got to take a look at taking the vaccine off the shelves. I don't think it's been tested properly. He gives him all of this bullshit. The guy believes him, takes it out of circulation, and then there's, within 2 years or something like that, there's a huge outbreak and 80 people die. And RFK Jr. has disclaimed this. He has said he's had nothing to do with it, even though we have the letter and we know that he went and he visited with,
he traveled, yes,
with the anti-vax contingent in that country. I forget the woman who was leading at the time, but she was a very sort of popular influencer, right up his alley, of course. And yeah, so blood on his hands, obviously.
Yeah,
we had Scott Kennedy on, who directed a film on this topic, and he actually got Bobby Kennedy on camera talking about it. And Scott held him to the fire, and Bobby just talked in circles. And it was recently that was revisited because Neil deGrasse Tyson was on Bill Maher, and he referenced that documentary, which Neil was involved with, which you can watch on PBS right now. So it's a very clear trail of damage that he's done, but he's denied it at every turn.
Sure. And
you asked, like, what are we advising? And I think with the murder of Brian Thompson, many people on the left seem to hold on to this fantasy that class awareness will erupt again. That, as you said, the class war is upon us. It does feel that way. It's a very interesting moment in those terms. But I think that the real paradox is that Mangione, as a lone wolf murderer, is inflaming the awareness of social murder, as Engels points out back in 1848. He's showing that he creates this paradoxical scene where the murder of one individual starts to sort of refer to the social murder of an entire industry, but somehow the solution to how that social murder is going to stop or is going to be mitigated in some way is not going to come through individual acts of fetishized violence, right? Like, and we can see that already begin to happen, where he becomes a folk hero. People start monetizing content, in the form of
Sure.
folk songs. It's like there's an eruption of individualized responses
Right.
that the structure of the society itself prevents from really joining or cohering. And I think that's something to really think about with regard to, like, how does mutual aid happen? Like, how do we actually help each other? Because
Yeah.
it does not, I think it can be stimulated by a spectacle like this, but I don't think it will be actualized by a spectacle
Of course not. I
like
mean,
this.
it's
Yeah.
it's ineffective, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's not actually. There will be other suits to take their place. They will not see the error of their ways. I mean, Aetna reversing their anesthesia policies a day after that Brian Thompson was murdered. I mean, that feels like maybe it was a win, but also, like, who knows? Maybe they already were going to rescind that. Aetna basically had restricted how much anesthesia they were going to allow to be covered under their healthcare plan. But I agree with you, and I think that it is a lazy man's way out. Like, look, you're not going to get me to chide people on turning him into a folk hero, and definitely I'm going to talk about a little bit later people who exasperatedly say similar things to Luigi Mangione should not be, locked up. I don't think.
God, what a terrible story out of Lakewood.
No, I mean, we could talk about it right now, but I guess I just want to say, like, it is it's a lazy man's way out, a lazy way of thinking that allows us to get out of mass mobilization, general strikes, all of the work that has ever accomplished anything in this country, which is mass movements, and it always has been and always will be. And if you want to talk about violence, the state's got a lot of it. And guess what? We will always lose. We will always lose. And we'll always lose in the so-called civil war that the right wants to bring upon us. We're going to lose. And my answer is not, well, then we got to get more guns. No, the answer is organizing. But let's talk about that.
It starts small. It starts small.
Yeah.
Organizing small. It means community gardens. It means figuring out who the elders are that need your food support, or we're really getting into, like, help your neighbor territory at this point.
100%.
And we got to figure out how to do that really, especially those of us who are introverts or who do too much online stuff. We have to figure out how to be a little bit less like that.
Yes, that's what I've been saying to everyone around me, and just have your neighbor's number, know them, get together with them, even if you don't disagree with them, how can you support people around you? So this is a story, yes, that came out of Lakewood, Florida. Breonna Boston, 42-year-old mom of 3, arrested for making threats to Blue Cross Blue Shield over a rejected medical claim. Here is some of the reporting about it.
The nature of the threats, we would also be asking for GPS with house arrest conditions to protect the community.
With her head in her hands, Breonna Boston learned she would be held in jail on $100,000 bond. The Polk County judge adding the bond was appropriate given the, quote, status of our country.
It's not like she's a child. She's 42 years old, so we're not dealing with a child here. She should certainly know better.
Lakeland Police Chief Sam Taylor says his department was contacted by the FBI Tuesday. Authorities say in a recorded phone call about a denied insurance claim, Boston told a Blue Cross Blue Shield employee, quote, delay, deny, depose. You people are next, end quote. The language matches the words police say were written on the shell casings found at the United Healthcare CEO's murder scene in New York City.
We will take this very seriously, and we will put you in jail if you do something like this. It is not a joke.
According to Boston's affidavit, the mother of 3 told police she did not own firearms and was not a danger to anyone. But she added, healthcare companies played games and deserved karma because they are evil.
Okay, so I could not be more incensed by this story. Mother of 3 gets a denied claim in moments of exasperation, says you people are next, and $100,000 bond. I feel like, again, we are in a very perilous moment of being targets, even for discussing these kinds of things. Our social media being monitored. We know which side the tech billionaires are on, and we know it's not just like physical state violence, but I mean, this is physical state violence. This is how the state will operate should you get out of line and say something like this. And look, guys, I was talking about on Wednesday, experience I had. I went into my doctor's appointment and they said, oh, guess what? We've got a $300 concierge fee we're charging annually. And I said, y'all can go fuck yourself. I didn't say you can fuck yourself, but I was like, bye. I'm not gonna, I'm gonna go somewhere else. And I had this appointment for six months. I can't afford a $300 annual fee. I pay $600 a month for healthcare. Like that's enough. Plus copay, whatever. What if I had said something a little more menacing, a little more angrier? I had been on the phone. What I don't know this woman Brianna's situation. I don't know what medical claims she had denied, but she could have been staring down and is staring down bankruptcy, illness, whatever. Like, and she gets arrested.
And what's the sheriff going to do? Is he going to arrest everybody, 60% of Facebook users, for what? For what? For commenting? It's kind of incredible.
For making a silly meme about Luigi?
Yeah, no prior convictions, is not a gun owner. She's speaking to somebody she doesn't know and she can't see in another state. And the charge was threatening a mass murder. I mean, even the text of what she says implies that, I imagine somebody's going to get you.
Sure.
I mean, it's not even there isn't any subject in the sentence, is there? Like, she's not talking about like what she's going to do. It's incredible. It's incredible stuff. Incredible stuff.
Up to 650,000 Americans have to file for medical bankruptcy every year. Just start there. I can't imagine. I am a person in a situation where I'm a tragedy away from that, as a lot of my friends are. There are probably people, and we can definitely tell the people who are about to run the healthcare agencies, they'll never have to worry about that. They just won't. They have the money, they have the resources. But for most Americans, we are not in that situation. And I have family members going through harrowing situations with cancer right now. I'm a cancer survivor. And so I can imagine, I have the agency to imagine the frustration that she was going through at the moment. And that was what was in her head. It's absolutely horrible. And to me, it's just, and it's not surprising it happened in Florida, but it's a state. Sure. And this state just trying to lock it down right away to say no one else get out of line. And that's really scary.
It's also going to negatively impact, people who are more, prone in regions. I mean, being from New Jersey, Derek, I have no idea what you would say over the phone, but like, it's like people say things, and.
Oh my God. And especially, I mean, the poor, I do feel for the people who are, the little button pushers and the bureaucrats and the mid-level folks who have to deal with and have, their prerogative is to deny you your claim. They're not at fault here, but haven't we all literally maybe my top worst, like 5 moments, like one of them is definitely on the phone with like some kind of customer support and like some kind of bureaucrat, like screaming at them. And again, these incidents happen all of the time, and they could be little or they could be big. But for me, I was just saying like, well, I skipped the pap smear the other day. So I guess like, you know what I mean? How many people I will get I'm fine, but it's like, that could be early cancer detection. Like there are so many ways that we are prohibited from even utilizing the healthcare that we do pay for, like this woman paying for it. And it's true like 1984 shit when this kind of stuff happens. And so the other thing, lastly, before I could get to you guys, is when a news outlet says like, like deny, depose, and whatever the hell else, right? I forgot the other one. Like deny, delay, depose. Thank you. That's not accurate reporting to say they were just written on the shells of the gunman. The accurate reporting is that is a strategy employed by the private healthcare industry to deny claims to its clients.
Yes, absolutely. And I flagged this earlier that my insurer is United Healthcare. It's through my wife's employer. Our rate is going up $120 a month next year. We get no
Yep.
additional benefits for that price. And I don't know your situation, but like 50% of women around the world, my wife has dense breast tissue. And so when she turned 40 2 years ago. When she started getting screenings, they would not cover screenings because of the dense breast tissue. So the initial pass here. So now every year when August rolls around, we have to look at our finances and say, okay, which level of testing to make sure you don't have cancer can we afford this year? Because the
Yes.
copay on top of what we already pay, $700 plus a month for both of us, is absurd. So
Yeah.
again, like, this is the situation we're in. And one of the things about our podcast is we have a lot of international listeners, and they rubberneck what happens at the American healthcare system so hard, because they're just like, how do you do this to your citizens?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and I think also a lot, like, I'm like, is it responsible to like raise a family here and be here? And like, again, I am of the age, it's like, I could be bankrupt by something going wrong, by a diagnosis, right? And that could be it. It could be a wrap. And that's terrifying. But yeah, it's also, oh God, don't get me started. But yes, this is where we are. And we need one another more than ever. Before you go, I'm all over the place, but Tulsi Gabbard picked to be director of national intelligence. Now, I knew a lot about Tulsi in the way that she sort of like capes for, authoritarians, whether they are, Bashar al-Assad or Modi. She's a raging Islamophobe. She says she's Hindu. She's against forever wars, but really loves the ones that kill Muslims. And she's going possibly be the the head of the national intelligence, whatever administration. And I am wondering, I didn't know this about her, but there's been new reporting about her part in the Science of Identity Foundation, which I guess her parents were both part of, and that she grew up in.
She did, yeah. So she's been a member of the Science of Identity since childhood. It's run out of Hawaii by an ex-Hare Krishna guy named Chris Butler, who separated out from ISKCON in the 1970s. He wanted to start his own gig. He had trouble with, the leadership. He wanted to also pretend that he was the group's chosen sort of divine leader. He's married to a yoga apparel guru named Y Lana, who some listeners or viewers might be familiar with. Like, she's very she's basically the image of fitness on the back of every VHS tape that was produced on yoga in the 1980s.
Wow.
So yeah, so there's a big sort of wellness connection there as well. And as far as we know, Gabbard remains a devout follower of Chris Butler. We've got a recent video clip of her attending a veneration ceremony in 2018 where everybody is venerating his photograph. Her parents were part of his original group, and Mike Gabbard, her dad, has been a Hawaii state politician since 2002.
Yeah.
Mostly known for being an openly homophobic jerk, which is right in line with Butler's views. Butler is completely obsessed with sexuality. So Science of Identity is kind of a typical high demand situation where it's secretive, and Butler demands a lot of obedience, and he dictates diet choices, relationships, employment, and stuff like that.
Ugh.
Children are homeschooled or they're sent to Science of Identity boarding schools. Gabbard actually spent a chunk of her own schooling at an ashram school in the Philippines, and former students of that school described that environment as, quote, almost prison-like and traumatizing.
Oh God.
Yeah,
Oh, God.
and so she really belongs to a group that teaches strict adherence to their ISKCON style interpretations of Hindu scriptures like the Bhagavad Gita. Gabbard was sworn into Congress on a copy of it, but you got to understand that it's not just the Bhagavad Gita; it's the Bhagavad Gita as interpreted by Chris Butler. and that means that there's a huge focus on personal purity and detachment from the material world, but also an obsession with demonizing homosexuality and traditional gender roles and women being subservient to men. And so, Gabbard's anti-trans position is pretty unsurprising. But you're flagging that, what does this mean for her attitudes towards Islam? And on one hand, she has this language where she preaches a kind of universal ecumenism. But, she has also been very supportive of Assad. I'm not sure why. I don't really understand the politics of her authoritarianism fetish, except that it kind of mirrors the structure of her religion. And Assad also was not Sunni, and therefore maybe a lesser danger in her view. I'm not sure. But, she did things like she pressed Obama to highlight the dangers of radical Islamism over any other threat to world security. Like if he didn't say that, then he wasn't really taking care of business.
Right.
And of course, she's an all-out hawk on Israel. So yeah, that's the picture. I don't think that we're getting a clear sort of sense of Tulsi Gabbard outside of the context of Chris Butler's views on sexuality and Hinduism and Islam.
What do you mean? Well,
I think I'm sure she's influenced by many things, but given my background is in investigative journalism and cults and high demand groups, and when people grow up in these organizations and they don't leave and they don't recover and they don't go through a period of sort of self-evaluation and re-identification and figuring out how they're going to relate to the normal world or the regular world, they are there. That's who they are. And if you get this sense of her as somebody who's always photographed or always depicted as almost like an icon in a temple, that's her husband. His name is Abraham, and I think he's part of the group as well. I don't know how long he's been part of it, but there's this way in which she is presented as a mouthpiece for the organization in the Science of Identities members' terms. Like that's how they speak of her. And I think that if you get this sense that you don't quite know what her politics are and how coherent they are, it's because the politics of Hindu nationalism are actually incoherent. They're not. You're not gonna square them with reality. They're gonna turn out to be, there's gonna be right turns and left turns, and you're not really going to understand what's going on because the devotion is actually to a vision of Krishna that Chris Butler has.
God, that's so terrifying. And yet it dovetails. I mean, sort of like Zionism dovetails with, Christianity in a disgusting, bizarre way. It's like Hindu nationalism also. It's like we're all in this against the gays and the Muslims. And that just like, great. We can agree until we fight.
Yeah, and I think that, I just think that the main takeaway is that it's not. I don't know how she's going to conduct herself as DNI, but what I really want to know is, how often is she going to be talking to Chris Butler on the phone, and what color is the phone going to be? Is it going to be the actual DNI phone, or is it going to be her personal cell phone, or Yeah, there's a deep influence there, and I think there's more to be learned about it.
Joe KNYC on YouTube says Krishna ain't say that. That's my favorite comment. It's sort of anyway. Shout out to Omarosa talking about Mike Pence. You guys, you're great. We've been talking to Derek Beres and Matthew Remski of Conspirituality podcast and book. They're awesome. I so always appreciate you guys. You are so tuned in, and it's terrifying. It's all really terrifying. We're gonna need you. So everybody listen to Conspirituality. They also have tons of bonus episodes, deep dives. It's a great thing to just like throw on and also rewind and be like, what? Come again.
Well, thanks for having us, Francesca. Always good seeing you.
Yeah, really good to see you. We'll come back on soon. Take care. And thank you all for being here. Oh God. Truly, like probably the scariest aspect of the Trump administration coming in is, and it's interesting too, right? Because it was the one issue that after last week is sort of like a perfect pairing with this week's Friday episode, because last week Mehdi Hassan rightfully said that the one issue that the MAGA base was able to pressure Donald Trump on was about vaccines, getting him to walk away from his, touting of the, whatever Project Warp Speed or whatnot and rolling out the vaccine. And here we are. Here we are with RFK Jr. and Bhattacharya and everybody else. Anywho, thank you so much for all of your super chats to Tracy Turner. Tracy Turner echoing the glyphosate stuff. Look, I think it is important to distinguish whether or not you're in the direct path of pesticides or whether there's some on our food. I think that's a good point. Rachel Atwood reminding us that Naomi Wolf is having a meltdown on X. Oh, God. Add it to the pile. There's like a whole pile of people having, in fact, there's a whole pile of Gen Xers having a meltdown on X. It's that's why he named it X, because it's about Gen Xers having midlife crises. Rachel Atwood says Thiel thinks he's a god and we all must worship him. Yeah, not with that oily face. Not with that like greasy ass. I'm slowly turning into an alien little like. Just Julie says it will be worse. Look up. Indeed. Man with a drone. When you next go on Piers, ask him about the time the weatherman made him cry. God, I've got to look that up. Diego Hernandez. I'm okay. Thank you for asking. Robert says Nancy Pelosi hospitalized while on an official visit to Luxembourg. Her office just announced. Yes, I saw that headline a little bit ago. In fact, Mitch McConnell was also like everyone's falling down. It's almost like they're in their mid 80s and they need to slow down and probably not run for effing re-election. It's almost like they should have passed the torch years ago. Rage Rock for now says, time to hunker down, stop having kids, to hell with what Musk and Vance say, cancel all vacations, head to Auto Trader / Craigslist if you need a vehicle, brace for impact. I mean, yeah, man, it's some real Last of Us vibes. Jim D 1001. My graphic novel Fuck Billionaires in the works for 2+ years launches on Kickstarter January 19th. Francesca considering having me as a guest. Oh, okay. Very cool. I love a good graphic novel about fucking billionaires. I hope it's not like actually fucking them. And thank you so much, Mike Patterson, DJC Mission, and Mama Dukes the Poet for all becoming members. You guys can become members and get access to all of the bonus episodes. There's an entire year and a half's worth. A lot of evergreen issues. Last episode, we dug into Medicare and Social Security, why they are going to become insolvent even quicker under Donald Trump, but yet they don't add to the debt, and yet we are being gaslit about how they add to the debt. And thank you over on Twitch to Aaron Rye for subscribing 2 months. New to the Frantifa, bienvenidos. Games, Anime, Music, and Life gifted a sub. That's very, very sweet. And also gifted 5 subs a few days ago. That's amazing. Guys, if you really want to support this show, you know what I'm asking you to do. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. So many perks, guys. You get your special little RSS feed. You get episodes, bonus episodes will be posted natively there. Access to guest suggestions, some chats, some book recommendations. Also, you get 60% off the American Prospect magazine, which is what I write for every single edition. My last episode or my last column is called It's Time to Do Crime, Mr. President. You also get 20% off our union-made merch, 100% union-made. Most progressive outlets can't say that, but spared no expense. Bitchuationroom.com. You get 20% off. It's all in the welcome note when you become a patron. And thank you so much to everyone who has. We will see you on Tuesday. We are back with a new episode. It'll be glorious. It'll be grand. I hope you are getting in the holiday spirit. Hope you're taking care of one another. Fight the patriarchy. What was it? Fight the power. Fuck the patriarchy. Free Palestine. Don't just bitch about it. Be about it. Have a good weekend.